Queen Elizabeth II passed away on September 8th, ending a 70-year reign that has led to an outpouring of emotion within the UK and beyond. Today, September 19th, marks a state funeral, and world leaders are gathered in London to say goodbye. So who are the leaders invited? Who have not been invited? And why has Korea's Hahoe folk village set up a memorial space for the late Queen? Hello and welcome to this very first edition of Issues and Insiders, a daily panel discussion program that addresses matters shaping our society and beyond. I'm your host, Min Sun-hee, and for today's talk on Queen Elizabeth II's state funeral and related issues, I have Professor LIM Eun-jung at Kongju National University live on the line. Professor Im, it is a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
I also have Pora Kwon, a Korean-British local councillor, live on the line. Councillor Kwon, it's a pleasure as well.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Right, Professor Im, we will start with you then. President Yoon Suk-yeol is among some 500 foreign dignitaries at the Queen's state funeral, which begins soon. Let's begin with a few words on the leaders who have been invited to this particular event and perhaps their ties to England.
Well, this will be remembered, remembered as the biggest, how would you say, the diplomatic event in this year, I think. You know, more than hundreds of the presidents or prime ministers or ambassadors and the monarchs too. The royal families also were invited. Of course, you know, American President Joe Biden and his wife, they arrived at London a few days ago, or many other monarchs, kings and queens from different countries, including the Japanese monarch, Naruhito, and his wife. They also came to London to show their condolences to the British royal family and the British people, of course, all the people who share the sadness. We see some interesting controversial figures too. For example, Saudi Arabian Crown Prince, so-called MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. As we all know, I mean, he has been a little controversial because of the assassination of the journalist, anti-government journalist, Kashkuj. And this is the very first his trip to Europe after all this, you know, controversy. So this is another pretty interesting point probably to watch for all of us. Or many other. How about the Chinese Wang Qishan, who is the vice president? Of course, as we all know these days, not only just, you know, U.S.-China relations, but overall the relationship between the Western countries and the China is tricky because of many different issues, including the Taiwan Strait issue. But still, again, the Chinese VP, vice president, he was invited too.
Right, and staying with that, Councillor Kwon, I understand there was quite a bit, or has been quite a bit of talk about the invitation extended to Chinese President Xi Jinping, who is sending his vice president, of course, Wang Qishan, as Professor Im has said, to the state funeral. Do you care to elaborate?
Yes, I think some of this was actually a little bit of miscommunication. You have to remember that whilst we prepare for events like this for many years, this has all happened very quickly in the space of a week, and sometimes those preparations don't keep up to date with diplomatic and sort of political movements that have happened. Usually, automatically, a invitation to an event like this is extended automatically to the head, either royal or political head of a country that the UK has positive diplomatic ties with. Between China and the UK in recent years, there have been issues. I think there was some miscommunication about whether or not the invitation was officially extended. And over the weekend, that changed. So I think that's where that came from. The Palace of Westminster, where the Queen's coffin was laying, is territory-wise slightly different. It's partly sort of political in that it's the entrance to the House of the Parliament, but it's also part of the royal estate as well. So who had jurisdiction over it, allowing the Chinese delegation to visit and not visit was also, I think, slightly muddled at times. But ultimately, the Vice President of China has been invited and visited. So I think that's now been resolved.
Right, it has. Meanwhile, Professor Im, as largely expected, Russia's Vladimir Putin has not been invited. And I understand a small number of other leaders have also been snubbed. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes, obviously Russia was not invited. That's, not that many people will be, questioning about that. But Belarus, for example, Belarus was not invited either, or Myanmar was not invited. And Syria, Venezuela, and Afghanistan. So far, these 6 countries were not actually included in the invitation. Each, of course, they do have the reasons for each case. Again, the Russia is so obvious. Belarus is obviously supportive for the Russia's stance. So, they definitely Western countries, or more specifically speaking, the UK, as we all know, the United Kingdom, they have been very strongly supportive for the Ukraine. So Russia, Belarus, they were not included. But Myanmar, as we all know too, they do have a politically difficult situation since the latest coup. So that is another reason for that. Afghan as well. Afghanistan, they do have a very much politically difficult situations now domestically after the Taliban captured the power. So that's another reason for the Afghanistan case. Syria and Venezuela, the diplomatic relations between the UK and then those countries do not actually exist. So that is why the UK again didn't include these 2 countries within the list.
Right. Councillor Kwon, while not a single Russian representative has been invited to the state funeral, North Korea has been invited to send an ambassador-level representative. What has been the response there to this invitation? I mean, despite Pyongyang's continued belligerence, if I may.
Yeah, so there hasn't actually been much talk about the North Korean ambassador invitation. Although we're discussing this now in terms of the diplomatic and sort of political repercussions, you have to remember, obviously, this is a funeral, and the Queen very famously is someone who did not try and get involved in sort of overt political positions. More than anything, the British people and the British state want this occasion to very much be about remembering the Queen, her life, her legacy, and to not use this to make the question of the invitations to make a statement about sort of political positions and so on. So when you have the extreme case of something like the Ukraine war and Russia, where obviously tensions are very high, it wouldn't have been possible to extend an invitation. But when it comes to North Korea, whilst the invitation hasn't been extended to the sort of the ruling politicians, I think on an ambassadorial level, it was considered a courtesy, and again, not for it to be a political statement. There isn't hostility in the UK, particularly to the North Korean people, for example. People are very conscious of separating the North Korean regime and the leadership with the North Korean people. So on an occasion like this, where politics is not the forefront of people's mind, it was very much more about extending the same kind of courtesy and, where possible, not excluding countries. So I believe that's where the decision came from.
Right. Professor, back here in South Korea, the Hahoe folk village has set up a memorial space to pay tribute to the late Queen. I understand that this particular folk village in the city of Andong in Gyeongsangbuk-do province has this very special bond with the late Queen dating back to the year 1999. What more can you share with us?
Yeah, I think many of us, many of Korean people do remember the scene, when she was visiting the village, Hahoe village, that was 1999. And then coincidentally, that was her 73rd birthday. And so the host community, they presented a very traditional Korean, how would you say, those table to celebrate her birthday. And host community, they serve all this Korean food, again, the traditional foods. So as you just watch it again, the scene, she really enjoyed the hospitality of the Korean those community in a very traditional way. So many of us, of course, do remember the scene. So as far as I know, in the Hahoe village as well, thousands of people actually went to the village to show their condolences to the Queen.
Right, and she also made quite a bit of national headlines here and also abroad for taking her shoes off before entering the Ryu household, I remember. Right, Councillor Kwon, for the sake of our viewers who are not familiar with the protocols involved for today, could you tell us a bit about the funeral proceedings to take place?
Yes, so this is a official state funeral, so there are set protocols, but there are also elements which are new. We have not had the death of a ruling monarch for, as you know, over 70 years, because that's how long, Queen Elizabeth was the monarch. The funeral will start, the funeral service will start at 11 a.m. today. It will take place at Westminster Abbey. For those of your viewers who aren't aware, Westminster Abbey is very, very close to where the political centre of the UK is, the Houses of Parliament. It's just sort of not even 500 metres. And from there, Westminster Abbey is where almost all the significant, important royal events take place. So every single king and queen since the year 1066 has been coronated. Has had their coronation at Westminster Abbey. It's where royal weddings take place and funeral services and so on. So that's very much in keeping with tradition. The service will be around an hour, and I understand there's going to be 2,000 guests, including all of those foreign dignitaries and political leaders that we were discussing earlier. And then from there, the coffin will travel through London towards somewhere called Wellington Arch, which is near Hyde Park. And then from there, it will actually travel on to Windsor, which is outside of London. That's where the Queen will be buried, laid to rest. And that will be in a private service later, just with family and sort of close members of the royal household.
Right. Professor, UK Prime Minister Liz Truss is also chatting with her counterparts from across the world as they're there to share their condolences. That being said, what are your prospects with regard to South Korea's ties with the UK under Liz Truss?
Well, we just got a new prime minister just very recently, so we still need to probably figure it out what kind of really policy directions the new prime minister wants to take. But as far as we know, she is well known as a laborer, a somewhat idealist. It looks like she has a very strong ideological belief. I think in that sense, that's that kind of ideological belief is very much well compatible, I think, with our president, the President Yoon Suk-yeol too, because President Yoon has been emphasizing the importance of course, the freedom and the peace, or the new Yoon Suk-yeol government is pursuing the so-called global pivotal state. So as long as the two governments can find out some common grounds, ideological common grounds, the common value, I think the two governments can work more than before, because these days, not only just Russia-Ukraine war, even before the Russian-Ukraine war, Russia's invasion to Ukraine, we have seen the very intensive competition between the United States and China in terms of many,
Right.
including high tax and so on. So so-called Indo-Pacific region really is becoming more and more increasingly important for the UK as well. So in that sense, I think, again, the two countries can do more than before.
Right.
I expect that.
Right, of course. We have common challenges to address with the joint, united effort, that is, of course. All right, Professor Im, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Councillor Kwon, thank you very much for joining us live at this very early hour at your end.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.